This show is brought to you by Wealth Talks Podcast. If you're looking to create generational wealth, listen to Wealth Talks Podcast.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's March 28th, 2018. Economy seems to be chugging along. Is it the calm before the storm? Is there a lot more here than meets the eye? Good questions all. Hey, as always, join the discussion. One of 2 ways to do it. Email us at kl@kerrylutz.com or use the hotline 914-424-4142. Well, calm before the storm? Let's find out. Andrew Zatlin, MoneyballeEconomics.com with us now. Andrew, welcome back.
Thanks as always. I love being here, Kerry. I love everyone. Good morning.
Well, good morning to you. So what is this calm before the storm? Or is the storm greatly exaggerated? Rumors of the economy's death premature? What's going on?
So let me contextualize. If you go back in time, let's use our Wayback Machine. 2016 was a pretty challenging year. We were heading into an election. There was a lot of spending that wasn't happening. Then we get the election and everything's off and running. Everything's going up in price. We've got the economy surging ahead. 2017 was the zig to the 2016 zag. So everything's great, but we kind of are starting to see, I believe in the economic data, we're done with that little pendulum swing. And now we're going to see a little bit of a pause. I don't think this is a bad thing, but I think 2018 is sort of that catching our breath moment. I'm seeing that in a lot of the data. Again, it's not bad. It's not a pullback. It's not like all of a sudden jobless claims are going to soar to 300,000. It's just the growth isn't going to be there for a while as a lot of the capacity comes on board and manufacturers sort of say, look, I've expanded, I've retrofitted all the equipment I needed to. We're good to go for 2018. And I think what that means is a little bit of a slowdown as we head into the end of the year from a macroeconomic standpoint, but still everything's still strong. At the same time, you've got Trump going after some amazingly good low-hanging fruit, pushing back on China and saying, we're done. No more of this. Pushing back on Russia. We're done. No more of this. Pushing back on Iran. We're done. No more of this. I love it. But I'm also seeing echoes of, and last time I was on board on your show, I mentioned, I called it Ronald Trump and Jimmy Obama, because I see echoes of what's happening today in what we saw under Reagan. Same thing with Make America Great Again. It's Morning in America. The same issues were being faced by Ronald Reagan that are being faced by Donald Trump, predatory trade by our so-called partners. And Reagan pushed back. He pushed back against Russia. He pushed back against Iran. He pushed back against everybody and said, no, America is going to come first in my negotiations. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to represent my country. And things really worked out well. I see Trump doing the same thing, going after that low-hanging fruit. And that's what's kind of keeping the economy going and chugging along is it's working. There's no way to point at anything Trump is doing and saying that's not helping the economy. Come on, everything he's doing is great.
The deficit, one could argue, in the long run is going to kill us. But, in Florida here...
I stand corrected. You're right. I stand corrected. Okay. But in the grand scheme of things, when you're throwing $20-something trillion at bankers and you throw $1 trillion at something that's actually productive, I think that's not the one you worry about. You worry about the $23 trillion.
Perhaps.
But you're right. I am mistaken. That's the one elephant in the room. But let's talk about that 20 whatever trillion it is now. Now, that's one of the waves that's going to challenge us, right? There's no way anyone with a sound mind can say jack up interest rates 1% over the next year and no one's going to notice. Of course, that's going to cause problems. You're seeing that in the stock market right now. And I see some challenges in the second half. And the question is, what typically happens at this point? Well, you've got a president who's pushing back pretty strongly against a bunch of countries who have been taking advantage of the previous administration's weakness. Again, we saw this under Jimmy Carter. The weakness that was there where, he wanted to do a good round of kumbaya and hugging it out. And what happened? Well, you see, the Iranians take over their country. They overthrow the Shah. You got the Russians taking Afghanistan over. That we saw where that went. We see that today. The Russians take Crimea. The Iranians now take over Syria, take over Iraq, take over Lebanon, trying to take over, Yemen. That's what happens when you create a vacuum, which is what that kumbaya stuff does. And now you've got a Trump pushing back and saying, no, that we're not going to play that game. And, it's great to see the results. You've got, North Korea's leader suddenly fleeing to China and saying, what do I do? You've got China saying, okay, we'll throw some goodie bags to the barbarians at the gate. Okay, fine, Trump will do something. At the end of the day, though, one of the things you start to see is you do start to see military spending ramp up because you got to put some bite into your bark. I'm going to connect some dots for you, Kerry, and let me see if you buy into this. Let's start with Saudi Arabia. Over the past year, we've seen some interesting things come out of Saudi Arabia. One is they picked up some islands from Egypt that are in the Gulf, not on the Suez side, but on the Jordanian-Israeli side of the Sinai Peninsula. You've got a new kid in town. He's taken over the government, done a clean sweep of the leadership. But along the way, he is talking the talk of trying to bring Saudi Arabia into the 20th century. Because I'm going to argue they didn't even make it into the 20th century. Never mind the 21st.
16th century, maybe. They were kind of living in the 8th century when you get down to it. They thought the Crusades are still happening.
You've got some folks there who are finally waking up and saying this cannot last. We don't work. We import our labor. We really don't do anything. And ultimately and eventually that's not going to work out. So you got all these things happening in Saudi Arabia. At the same time, I look at things that are happening in Israel, and I look at some things that are happening in Egypt and elsewhere, and I'm going to come to the following conclusion. If you wanted to move, well, let me step back. I'm going to argue, or I'm just going to throw this out there. The whole thing in Syria was all about shipping gas and oil across Syria to be a rival to the Russian gas pipelines to Europe. This is all about gas. This is all about Russia maintaining control of Europe via oil and gas, and that there was an effort to create a rivalry to that pipeline and thereby create competition, but really to undermine Russia's control. And that's why they eventually went in to stop that. All right. If you're Saudi Arabia, did you know, by the way, Kerry, that under the Ottoman Empire, a gas pipeline was built between the Mediterranean and Saudi Arabia, and it runs through Israel? Did you know that pipeline still exists?
I had no idea.
Yeah. And if you wanted to ship oil from Saudi Arabia to Europe, you don't go up and around and across. You go directly through Israel. That's the smartest, fastest route. So let me paint a picture for you. I think what you're going to see, and by the way,
and that'll neutralize, let's also say, that would neutralize any threat that the Iranians have over oil shipment, because you wouldn't have to worry about tankers going through the Straits of Hormuz. You would have a pipeline just going straight through from Saudi Arabia.
So what do you do?
Israel.
You got to protect that pipeline. All right. So, those islands that were just picked up are one form of pipeline protection, because now you can put your naval base there. Mm-hmm. But then you got the mafiosos there in Gaza and in the West Bank. So you got to give them a taste. So what do you do? Well, Israel's been saying to the Gazan rulers, what if you built a port offshore? Now, wouldn't that be nifty as a great way to offload oil? So this is what you're starting to see, I think, are the preliminary kind of how do we change the entire structure? And basically, I'm Saudi Arabia. How do I come back to the table and have some presence here? Well, the whole thing with Israel is a combination of religious and political. It's religious only, again, because the Saudi Arabians made it religious. So you got to temper that. You bring that fuel down and you say, look, we may not like the Yahuds. We don't like the Jews. We don't have to love them. We don't have to buy into certain things that are said in the Quran about Israel being the land of the Jews by Muhammad himself. We don't have to do that. But we can at least say we don't have to hate them or kill them. Yeah. Now, once you remove that religious element that adds to the fuel of fire, you realize, look, this has all been about politics. This is all about land. It's all about bakshish. So that you can deal with. You give the Gazans some bakshish. You give the West Bank Palestinian rulers some box trees because you run the pipeline through their territory. That prevents them from blowing up the pipeline and motivates them to stop the other folks in the area from blowing it up because now they get the money. And so you buy your way at the table. And I think that's what you're starting to see is these preliminary, you have this preliminary outreaches to the Israelis from Saudi Arabia is basically they're going around. They're going to say enough of this. This is silliness. Let's just come to a deal. It doesn't even have to be a final deal. Something close to, say, 70% of a deal, then they can turn around to their people and say, look, we, not the Iranians, created peace. And guess what? Aren't we clever? We're going to run pipelines through Israel and take advantage of the Israelis. And that's kind of us tricking those Jews and taking advantage of them. And let's face it, we're colonizing them to a certain effect.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Looking to build your wealth? Concerned about your retirement? Market volatility? Inflation? Then Wealth Talks is for you. Wealth Talks is an independent educational podcast that helps you build wealth in all areas of your life. And you know how I love podcasts. Increase your financial IQ while getting exposed to strategies that the wealthy use to get and stay wealthy. You'll get actionable intelligence that you can put to use immediately. Wealth Talks is way beyond money because there's so much more to wealth than just dollars, euros, or yuans. Listen to Wealth Talks Radio every Wednesday. Your host, Dr. Tom McPhee, is a private wealth counselor and author of multiple books. His ready-to-go process will get you started with the information you need to create and to sustain wealth. He'll inspire you to take control of your finances and create wealth that you can pass on from generation to generation. Aren't you tired of people who talk the talk but can't walk the walk? Don't waste any more time. Start your wealth building journey now with Wealth Talks podcast. Go to our site, www.life-benefits.com, or just Google Wealth Talks podcast and start learning today.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Again, the only way to create peace in that area is to not create a back down. You have to basically give the Arabs their pride. So if you can give them a new framework of dealing with the situation that boosts their level, boom, you'll get peace. And then you buy off the various mafiosos who are really just, sitting there just making money off the situation. It also puts a thumb into Iran's eye. Because now, why are you helping Hamas and Hezbollah? The Palestinians have made peace. What are you trying to do? All right, I think that's underway. But at the same time, go back to what needs to happen in terms of putting some bite behind the bark. Don't know if anyone noticed this, but recently, Saudi Arabia allowed Air India to travel across their airspace to Israel. Now, it sounds like it's innocuous, but let me explain why that was huge. Until recently, Iran looked at Israel and said, there's really nothing you can do. You could take out the Iraqi Osirak nuclear power plant. But to come to Iran and do it, you had to fly much further. You had to go all the way around the peninsula of Saudi Arabia and come up. And you know what? Nobody can do that. The distance is just too much to do that and get back. So the logistics, we're not afraid of you. There's no bite in your bark. Well, now, apparently you can fly over Saudi Arabia. Isn't that interesting? Because it's now closer to Iran than Iraq was. So that's where I say the bite behind the Trump bark. Also, two other points, if I may, that sort of connect some more dots. The U.S. is reducing its forces in Turkey, moving those forces to Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is reducing its forces in Qatar, moving those forces to Saudi Arabia. Now, right now, Turkey and Qatar are friends of Iran, and yet we have our forces there. My reading of that is we're doing two things. First of all, we're kind of going back to when we had 60,000 troops in Saudi Arabia. We're going back to a period of if Israel does do a flyover, or that threat is now real, there's more bite now. Our troops are now in Saudi Arabia. They're not distributed. They're concentrated. And the two places, if you remember during the attempted coup d'etat against Erdogan, he went to our Air Force base in Sirleaf and surrounded it and basically took our people hostage. No problem. He just took our people hostage and said, oh, yeah, he'll do that again at the drop of a hat. We move our people out. He can't do that. And remember, Turkey's also put a bunch of forces in Qatar. So there's this whole alignment that's been against the U.S. And now you're seeing the forces being moved around. The chess pieces are moving into a position that says Israel is now free and clear to bomb Iran any day that they want to. That is the real pushback against Iran. This whole thing with the Russian spies is part of this as well. Why did the U.S. give up 60 spies? Why did we chase 60 Russian spies out? Because we went to the Europeans and said, if you want us on board, we're going to go on board in a big way. But now you've got to do quid pro quo. You need to be on board with us, with Iran. So I guarantee you what's happening right now is you've got the diplomatic stuff with Iran, this Russian thing, that's part of it, pushback against Russia in order to get pushback against Iran. But the real bite is how we've moved our pieces around the chessboard now. We're positioning our pieces to protect Saudi Arabia from any kind of issue going on. I guarantee you when the prince was out here, there were, the usual trade deal. Okay, but you're going to buy $100 billion of our weaponry. Look at the chessboard. Look at how the pieces are being moved around. And it's all about putting bite back into the U.S. presence in the Middle East. And let me explain why that matters. Because a lot of people, I actually had a talk with Ron Paul, and his attitude is, why are we even there? And what was interesting is I said, Ron, I love you. I love what you say. But the reality is, if we're not there, what happens in that vacuum? And he didn't have an answer, right? Because he hasn't thought that far.
He's never had an answer, just that we shouldn't be internationalists, military adventurists, and maybe there's some truth to that. But what's the alternative?
What's the alternative? But let me explain. Our entire lifestyle is 100% dependent on a petrodollar. 100%. And right now, Russia, China, and Iran are making moves to destroy that because that's the easiest way to attack us right now. So we've got to preserve that. If you want an American way of life, you have to prop up Saudi Arabia in some way, shape, or form. And this is an elegant way to do it. And to be honest, Trump is saying, I'm not really spending a dime. I'm just moving people who are already there into a new place where they're more protected, more able to bring the fight. And I think also at some level, moving your troops out of eastern Turkey is kind of interesting because one of the reasons that they were there was as a buffer against Russia. So I'm going to want to bring this home so as an investor, what do you do? Well, if you take the protection out of Turkey, which is right now waging a war against the Kurds, what a nasty operation that is.
Yeah.
They're waging a war against the Kurds. I can't believe we're not doing anything there right now. It's just incredible that
well, Bolton seems to be wanting to do something about it.
A little too late right now. But what's happening is I think one thing I'm going to say is short the Turkish lira. And here's why. They are overstretched. They are spending a lot of their capital on fighting battles. And now we're removing basically an army force away from their rump, which is where Russia is. So now they're going to have to spend even more money protecting that area. So I think Turkey's debt load is going to surge very quickly. So I think the lira is going down. Also, let's face it, Europe doesn't like Turkey. We don't like Turkey. Nobody really likes Turkey, which is why they're allied kind of sort of with Iran and Russia. Nobody really likes them either. Yeah. So you've got an alliance there. But Turkey's a dangerous country. And I would argue that we have to tread carefully with how we handle Turkey because of where they're located and the dynamics of Turkey. But fundamentally, I think moving your troops out actually kind of is a gentle way of saying, okay, let's see what you do now. At the same time, I would say invest in military defense stocks because all this stuff leads to anxiousness, leads to friction points heating up, leads to more U.S. arms sales.
Yeah, both at home and abroad, Andrew. So Turkey, interesting country. It's the gateway from Europe to Asia, from Asia to Europe. It straddles both continents. The world's most active shipping lane in the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, which wars have been fought over in the past, located in Turkey. So it's always a key pivotal point to keep an eye on. So getting back to the economy, and so we're getting a little pause in growth, perhaps. Perhaps we had the pause already, Andrew, and you just don't know it. The first quarter of the year is always the weakest for GDP, almost always. We might have only seen a 1.5% increase. I just wonder about these GDP stats that are coming out because they seem to not make any sense. Everything Trump has done has been inflationary in terms of putting more money in people's hands, increasing incomes. It doesn't make sense that the tax cut alone isn't having a more salutary effect?
So let's talk about that, because I think I'm going to give you my view. Remember, the tax cut was pre-spent. If you look at the data, what you see is people, if you look at the savings rate in the last quarter, everyone overspent. I mean, everyone went into debt, just massive debt. And why did they do that in the fourth quarter? Because A, it's holiday shopping time, but B, they felt good because the Trump tax cut was coming. So they knew that they could, ramp up their credit cards, which we saw happen, and ramp down their savings because money was about to come in. But the problem is, they've done a lot of spending. This is why you get that zigzag. Everyone's spending in the fourth quarter, and then they hit the pause button in the first quarter as they pay the bills. The tax cut and the impact comes middle and late in the quarter. A lot of the tax filings, right? Those are a February, March event. So but basically, you have 1 quarter of healing is what I'm saying. And we've started to see that, again, if you look at things in the January data, and you'll see that people had to rebuild their savings. That's what they did. I think the first quarter is just, a throwaway quarter, because even though we've got the Trump spending coming, it's not here yet. And it was kind of pre-spent. But as we go through the year, you will see more spending. Unfortunately, it's a question of where that spending goes. And I think that's what we've seen is people have the stuff they need. And so the spending isn't going on things anymore like cars, TVs, that kind of thing. It's going on experiences, going out, going on vacations. These are things that don't get picked up very easily in the mainstream data points. For example, retail spending, one of the top things, and I track retail spending. Retail spending does nothing for travel. All that money spent flying around or at hotels isn't picked up in the retail figures. But I would argue quite convincingly, actually, that that's a huge chunk of where people spend their money. And so if you want to track consumer spending, you don't track it at a storefront only. You have to look at these other data points, and they're not picked up. Vice Index, I pick it up. I pick up gambling. I pick up drinking. I pick up the experience side of where people are spending money. And guess what? They're hitting the pause right now. In a couple months, I would anticipate, and this is, again, it's not in the data yet, I would anticipate the spending picks up again. But then you've got the inflation challenges coming in. I mean, there's always that economist is always going to say yes on the one hand and yes on the other hand. The one data point that I look at is semiconductors. And I'll tell you why. Again, we visited this topic before. I think semiconductors really are the oil or the steel of the 21st century economy. Everything uses semiconductors. Everything relies on semiconductors. Semiconductors peaked in December, and they peaked at a huge number. I mean, just strong number. But they've started to slow down. And again, it's not crashing, but it's slowing down. And we're kind of repeating a pattern that we did in 2011, where things ramped up really fast, and then the pause button was hit, and the GDP slowed down. It was saved because all of a sudden we discovered oil. And so the GDP didn't crash, but GDP ex oil. And remember, the oil love was pretty concentrated. Most of the U.S. did not benefit from the oil and fracking and all that good stuff. It was a very concentrated wealth. The rest of the country was not doing well in 2012. I'm concerned that we're repeating that same thing where all this demand has happened, and semiconductors are pretty upstream in this whole cycle. It takes about half a year for a semiconductor to be made until it finally gets into the thing to be sold. So today, if semiconductors demand is starting to slow down, that's talking about end of the year stuff. So that kind of fits my belief that, what's happened is companies are excited. They're strong, but they don't need to rush out and expand their factories anymore. And so now, well, if I don't need to expand my factories, then maybe I don't need to hire as many people. Again, I'm not firing, but maybe I'm not hiring as much. And so I actually think we're going to see a pretty bad payroll number coming up. Payrolls come out next Friday. I'm the number 3 forecaster on Bloomberg for private payrolls, and I think it's going to be a low number.
All right. Well, we're going to be watching out for next Friday for the payroll number. Andrew, hey, as always, be part of the discussion. Email us, Andrew, with any questions, kl@kerrylutz.com. That is the email address. Phone number, hotline 914-424-4142. And Andrew, so where's the best place to find you? Obviously, moneyballeconomics.com. What else?
Moneyballeconomics.com and the Moneyball Trader if you want to throw some money down and get some good stock and ETF ideas.
All right. Excellent. Hey, and find us, our Twitter feed, @Kerry Lutz. Andrew, we'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks for coming.
Happy investing, everyone.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.